We have finally arrived, my friends, to the thrilling conclusion of the William the Conqueror plus Stamford Bridge series. The Battle of Hastings. The battle. The most important battle in the English language, too. um, this battle, it goes without saying how important it is. Like I said, it definitely had an impact on not only the history of England, but like I said, the language, even the language that I'm speaking right now. And it is such a cool battle because of how close it is. Like, William the Conqueror almost lost. Like, Godwinson, despite being exhausted, despite forced marching, despite all this, almost won. So I want to give my props to Godwinson for how he did. The guy was a great commander in his own right. But at the end, William the Conqueror wins, and that helps so much usher in a new era for England. And I'm really looking forward to seeing this video. Last time we covered this was really in this channel's like infancy, when we covered Oversimplified's telling of it. It'll be cool to see HistoryMarche's portrayal. And yeah, I always put the link to the original videos down below. It's always the first link you'll see. And yeah, if you want to help me out and help this channel out, I would like to ask, feel free to please subscribe, like, comment. It really helps me out a lot, and I really appreciate it with all my heart. With that said, and without any further ado, let's get to it, shall we? Let's watch the Battle of Hastings by HistoryMarche.
It is the 14th of October, 1066. An Anglo-Saxon army, made up of a small number of professional troops and men from the local shires, gathered on a gentle sloping ridge under the banner of King Harold Godwinson to protect the kingdom against the Norman invaders. The invading host was a well-equipped, highly trained amalgam of Norman knights, archers and infantry, led by the formidable Duke William of Normandy, who came to stake his claim to the crown of England. On the fields and slopes of Senlac Hill, near the
Yeah, I think in this battle, Godwinson mainly had his shield wall, and he just held it. Eventually it does break, because some people sally out, I believe, and then that leads to his ultimate defeat, if I remember correctly. But point is, the majority of the battle was just him in a shield wall. I think mainly just infantry, like only infantry units. On paper, not as impressive as William's army with archers and great knights and cavalry, but still beyond effective that it managed to hold out against all of that.
The town of Hastings, history is about to be made. I'm pleased to It is the late 9th century. Having already pillaged and wrought terror upon numerous settlements across the North Sea, Viking raiders appeared on the shores of Francia. Despite his best efforts, King Charles the Simple could not check the growing Norse power, and after the devastating siege of Chartres in 911, he was forced to cede a swathe of northern territory to Rollo, the leader of the Norse raiding parties, giving him rights for his people to intermarry with the Frankish locals and make the land their home. This paved the way for the Duchy of Normandy, and with Duke Rollo as its founder, established a dynasty that would leave a lasting legacy on Western Europe.
That is I did not know it began like that, though. I know parts of France, at least the whole France that we're familiar with, were, broken with Brittany and whatnot, and, all that, but I didn't think it began right here with these Viking invasions. Wow.
4 successors later, Robert I inherited control of the duchy amidst a civil war that caused much instability. But despite troubles at home, he intervened in the civil war in Flanders, meddled in the affairs of the French crown, led a military campaign against his rebellious vassal, the Duchy of Brittany, and, at best, had a rocky relationship with the church. Faced with excommunication, Robert attempted reconciliation by restoring church property that he and his vassals seized, and set off on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, leaving the duchy in the hands of his illegitimate 8-year-old son.
Okay, so, I love that photo, like, it's more like, I'm sorry, but, okay, now he's recapping what we covered in the previous videos of this series.
William. Across the Channel, Edward of Wessex, Duke Robert's cousin, inherited the throne of England from his half-brother, Harthacnut. Their mother, Queen Emma of Normandy, who was first married to Ethelred the Unready, and then to Canute the Great, used her significant political clout to coordinate the transfer of power between her sons. With Edward's accession, the House of Wessex was restored to the throne, ending the decades-long rule of the Danish Yelling dynasty in England that was established after Canute the Great's decisive victory at the Battle of Assundoun. From early on in his reign, Edward drew advisors, nobles and priests from his and his mother's Normanno-French circles to build his own power base. He further solidified his position by marrying Edith, daughter of the most powerful earl in England, Godwin of Wessex. But Godwin opposed the rise of Norman influence in the Anglo-Saxon royal court, and years of political infighting followed, testing the power of the two men. Edward finally managed to negotiate the backing of Earls of Mercia and Northumbria to exile Godwin along with his wife and sons in September 1051. Knowing that the powerful Earl would return, the childless King of England used his lack of an heir as political leverage by naming a distant relative, Duke William of Normandy, as his successor, further solidifying his ties with the Norman aristocracy. Just months later, Godwin returned with an army and quickly gained support of the navy, burghers, and the peasants. This compelled Edward to restore his earldom, but Godwin refrained from openly opposing the naming of a Norman aristocrat as heir to the throne, aware that the king was backed by Earls of Northumbria, Mercia, and could possibly count on the support of the Duke of Normandy as well. Having inherited the duchy as an 8-year-old illegitimate son of a duke, William and his supporters struggled to consolidate their control over Normandy. Prominent members of the aristocracy vied to place themselves in power, or at least bend the child duke's arm to increase their own influence. It took William a number of years to secure his rule, but the prolonged fight for his position turned him into a shrewd politician and a tenacious military leader. By the time he was in his 30s, he exacted either direct or indirect control over most of the northern coast of France. Back in England, Godwin died suddenly. His son Harold succeeded him as Earl of Wessex, while his other sons gained control over several major earldoms, in effect bringing most of England under the control of the Godwins. Meanwhile, the aging and increasingly ill King Edward withdrew from the affairs of the state, becoming increasingly dependent on the Godwins. He gradually deteriorated before falling into a coma, dying just days later in early January 1066. Unsurprisingly, in the wake of the king's death, prominent nobles were not far, ready to joust for position on the vacant throne. According to some of those present, before drawing his last breath, Edward briefly regained consciousness and pointed a finger at someone in the room. Conveniently, the Godwin-dominated royal court interpreted this to be Harold, chosen to protect the kingdom.
Protect? Wink. I apologize for my silence. We already covered this in the previous 3 parts of this series, plus the Stamford Bridge battle, so this is all just recap. I shared most of my thoughts in those other videos, so I, apologize. But either way, yeah, the Godwins essentially had this, chokehold on England, right? That's about to get completely upheaved by William. All these years of moving the family around, and it all ends up for naught,
The powerful Earl seized the moment, crowning himself King of England the very next day. When the
Yeah, there's also the mention of, when Harold was a guest, quote-unquote guest for William, that William made him, swear to honor William's ascension. Though, again, that's a bit iffy if Harold even had a choice, and how much of it, but still,
reached Normandy, William was outraged, claiming his right to the English crown. Almost immediately, he began preparations to take the throne by force, ordering the building of a large fleet that could transport his army across the Channel, and moving to rally political support for his invasion. Many nobles of Normandy answered the call, and more banners came from Flanders, Brittany, and France after being promised vast wealth, land, and political positions in England. But, unfortunately for the shaky rule of Harold Godwinson, William wasn't the only contender for the throne. Prior to his death, Edward named yet another successor, Edward the Exile, who had spent the last 40 years in Hungary and had returned from banishment in 1057 with a family of his own, but had died shortly afterwards. However, his son Edgar Atheling inherited his father's claim, but lacked any significant support to take the crown of England. Complicating matters further for Harold, his brother Tostig fell out of favour for overtaxing the inhabitants of Northumbria, leaving the king with no choice but to revoke his earldom. Plotting vengeance, Tostig contacted the King of Norway, Harald Hardrada, persuading him to invade England. Harold was yet another pretendant, having inherited the claim to the English throne from Magnus, the former King of Norway and Denmark, who had made an agreement with the late King Harthacnut of England that if either died, the other would inherit their lands. Despite his claim, however, the Norwegian king was under no illusion that he would have to fight to take the throne. Back across the Channel, William was ready after months of preparation, but unfavorable north winds kept the ships anchored in Normandy. Regardless, the Duke was in no hurry, as intelligence reports revealed that Harold deployed his forces along the coast, so he decided to bide his time until he could make an unopposed landing. Indeed, the King of England kept...
Yes, so, as mentioned, the winds delayed William's departure, but I like hearing this also pragmatic reason of just wait and... Again, William was known for his patience, and he was quite opportunistic, as previously established in the previous videos, and... Yeah, essentially waiting for this was a good move on his part. And again, Godwinson had to fight literally the world, right? Hardrada was coming, William was coming. He essentially had this, unfavorable position, very precarious. And again, he wasn't king for long, but man, did he go out swinging,
His troops on high alert throughout the summer, ready to contest the Norman invasion. But supply shortages and the arrival of the harvest season forced him to disband much of his army in early September. Just as he returned to London, more bad news came for Harold. Aided by Tostig, Harald Hardrada invaded Northumbria and defeated a much smaller force led by the newly appointed Earl Morcar. Once news reached Harold that a 10,000-strong Viking force had landed in the north, he rushed to meet them. In barely a few days, he scrambled a resistance force, marching
Again, like I said in the last video of the Stamford Bridge, beyond impressive. His forced march, not only to defeat Hardrada, but immediately to go challenge, William, was so impressive. It's one of the coolest things about Godwinson. And the fact that he beat Hardrada and almost beat William, Godwinson is beyond underrated. Of the trio of these three, I think Godwinson's the most underrated. He was a great commander in his own right, who could stand toe-to-toe with these guys as well.
Way from London to York in under 4 days. On September the 25th, Godwinson's force pulled off a heroic victory against Hardrada's invasion force at Stamford Bridge. It was a glorious day for the King of England, but the sweet taste of victory was short-felt.
I'm loving these animations he's doing. In this video in particular, I feel like he had, his sense of humor is more showing with all these little animations. I've never seen HistoryMarche put this many jokes or, little funny characters on. He definitely must have been in, a funny mood when he was making this,
That the Normans had landed in the south, celebrations were cut short as Harold had to turn
back. And again,
back
he has to march all the way back. Insane, right?
To rescue his throne. Aware that the King of England was busy in the north, Duke William took his time to set up a strong position, aware that resupplying his army would be difficult in case of a long campaign. He captured Pevensey, then advanced on Hastings further up the coast. Both towns were fortified, from where he could now raid the surrounding area. To the east, a few ships were blown off course, landing at Romney, where the Normans fought the local Fyrd. By early October, Harold reached London after a grueling forced march, his troops still exhausted from the battle at Stamford Bridge that took place just a few days ago. The army encamped near the capital for a week, preparing their equipment for the upcoming engagement and attempting to catch up on some much-needed rest. He probably could have waited to assemble a larger army, but as soon as his troops were sufficiently ready, Godwinson eagerly marched to meet the Normans, confident after his recent stunning victory. He wanted to use the element of surprise, just as he had against Hardrada's invasion force in the north. But as the Anglo-Saxon army closed in, Norman scouts spotted their movement. With William now marching to meet him, Harold chose the ground suitable for his army, some 10 kilometers northwest of Hastings, where he waited for William.
And he, again, despite how more prepared William was, Harold still managed to at least get him a little bit surprised with this, right? And managed to at least choose where to fight, taking that initiative. Still is beyond impressive.
Harold's army was comprised almost entirely of infantry. Lacking mobility, he took up a defensive position on the Senlac Hill, atop of a south-sloping plateau, with dense woodland and swamps protecting his flanks and rear. Professional contingents of housecarls formed in the center, though their ranks were fairly depleted after the bloody encounter just 2 weeks ago. The rest of the troops were the highly motivated but poorly trained Fyrd peasant militia, mobilized just days prior from the local shires. In contrast, the invading host was a well-equipped, generally high-trained amalgam of Norman knights, archers and infantry in the center, with Franco-Flemish and Brittonic infantry and cavalry on the flanks. The Duke's army was fairly experienced, well-organized, and eager to fight. In the early hours of the morning, William sent forth his archers, planning to weaken the tight Anglo-Saxon formation. But Harold packed his men in a tight formation, knowing that sticking together and taking a strong defensive stance was their best bet at a victory.
Yeah, it's like that saying, defense is the best offense. I think it's sometimes said, and in this point, that quote kind of rings true. I believe it's when some of the peasant contingents break the formation that allows his inevitable defeat. If I'm remembering correctly, I could be wrong, but I believe that lack of discipline is ultimately what does it, because if they had just kept holding the shield wall, they would have won. It was close. And again, Godwinson had a great plan. The best offense is a good defense, And, yeah.
The arrow volleys shot uphill and were largely ineffective, directly hitting the shield wall at a flat angle. Most of the arrow fire was absorbed by the Anglo-Saxon shields. Nonetheless, the Duke ordered his infantry to pass through the archers and head up the slope to test Harold's line. He counted on his footmen to provide the main fighting grunt of the battle, but despite their best efforts, they were unable to open gaps in the solid shield wall. William then led his knights up the slope, hoping their shock charge would punch through the embattled enemy infantry. But the shield wall held. By midday, the combined push of heavy infantry and mounted knights failed to break the resolve of the defenders. Norman cavalry struggled to fight against Harold's men, who were swift to cut down the horses with their axes. They were forced to fall back and regroup for another charge, but the Bretons on the left mistook this maneuver for a rout and began to flee. Some in the Anglo-Saxon line broke formation, leaving the solid shield wall to pursue the enemy.
Yeah, see, it's kind of showing some of the issues on both sides. There's even a point in this battle, I believe, where the Normans believed William himself was killed, and they almost broke, and he had to manually, personally ride and inform his men he ain't dead yet, So yeah, there were points where the Normans were on the verge of just breaking completely, and here you're seeing a weakness off the bat. This previous indestructible shield wall, showing just the undiscipline of the peasant levies, right? As some break out. Definitely at the end, if they had held their discipline, things might have gone better,
Seeing the rout on his left, William ordered the rest of his troops to disengage and withdraw back down the slope. It was reported that the Duke had 2 horses slain under him during the chaotic fighting, fueling a rumor that he was struck down, which added to the confusion. To prevent a complete rout, William removed his helmet and rode through the ranks in full view of his troops, yelling at the men that he is alive. He then commanded a contingent of Norman knights to strike the flank of the pursuing 3rd Militia, and managed to rally some of the fleeing troops on the left. As the reformed infantry...
That's such a cool moment, right? Him riding him among his soldiers, letting them know, I ain't dead, guys, don't worry. Because obviously we've seen so many times, whenever an army thinks their commander is dead, they just break. Morale instantly shatters. So, again, such a cool moment. And again, I think William noticed just the weakness of Godwinson's side, in terms of they can be pursued. These guys will break if they need to, right? This was probably a big telling on his part, oh, okay, they can be lured. Also, Godwinson's death plays a big part in their defeat, because I believe some accounts is that he got shot in the eye with an arrow, which is such a brutal way to go.
faced about, and the knights closed in, the Anglo-Saxons were forced onto a small hillock, where they were surrounded and destroyed. Wanting to seize the moment, now that Godwinson's line had thinned out after heavy fighting, William launched a general assault, personally leading the charge. Archers again shot uphill at the shield wall, but just like the last time, their arrows bounced off the tightly packed shields of the defenders. The advancing Norman infantry, followed by the mounted knights, were met with a barrage of spears, axes, and stones before locking weapons with the Anglo-Saxons. Unable to force openings in the shield wall, once again the attack failed, and the Normans retreated back off the ridge. A break in the fighting probably occurred early in the afternoon, as both armies needed rest and food.
Again, but it goes to show still, just Godwinson's plan was working so effectively. Like, on paper, I think William's army has better composition with, you know, the knights, his infantry, his missile units, but still, all that can't break the shield wall, you know, and it is just so impressive how close this battle really is.
With losses mounting for the Normans, it seemed that Harold's plan was working. Seeing the futility of the attacks against the solid Anglo-Saxon line, William revised his strategy, this time sending only his knights forward. Looking to recreate the accidental success on the left flank that drew out some of the Anglo...
Again, William, not an idiot, he realized these guys can be lured, you know what I mean? And I think he definitely tries to accomplish that again, which is really smart, on-the-fly thinking. Instead of just trying to brute force his way through, he's trying to now be more cunning and get them to break discipline.
Anglo-Saxon infantry earlier in the day, the knights were tasked with charging Harold's line at various points, and then retreating back to try and lure the defenders into giving chase down the slope. The Normans engaged the defenders in a brief skirmish before pulling back. However, the feigned retreat failed to draw out the enemy, but the brief clash further thinned out the ranks of the formidable housecarls in the shield wall, who were replaced by third units. With archers in support, the knights charged again, now with more conviction, exchanging blows with the Anglo-Saxons for much of the afternoon. Then they broke and retreated in disarray. Some of the defenders left the shield wall in pursuit of the fleeing Normans.
Yeah, like, it goes to show, just like, it almost is like this last grab for something, right? William's like, I need to beat these guys. I need to lure them out. Like, and it's a gamble that paid off beautifully, cause it worked. He managed to get the lesser disciplined peasant levies to actually move. And again, a gamble that worked, but it goes to show you, right? It's almost like his last hope to get this to happen.
It is not known whether Harold wanted to give chase or if it was spontaneous, though it is likely that the king ordered the troops to hold the line, but failed to control some of the men. And this time, the feigned retreat worked. William's knights wheeled about to face the incoming infantry. During the pursuit, the Anglo-Saxons lost cohesion and were now caught in the open without the protection of the shield wall. Spending much of their energy charging down the slope, the footmen stood no chance against the mounted Norman knights and were quickly overrun. Having dismantled part of the shield wall, the rest of William's army struggled up the hill, bearing down on Harold's remaining units.
It really was like it's almost in its own way just who's gonna break first, as Godwinson's forces are just being like slowly zapped out. At the same time, even William's taking heavy damage. It's like, who's gonna break first? It's almost like this race, which I really like. It's such a cool little aspect of this battle that makes it so legendary.
With a renewed fervour on the invading side, the Duke's infantry and cavalry struck the Anglo-Saxon line. Unable to fight effectively against the better-armed Normans and French, the Anglo-Saxon units rapidly crumbled, with their forces breaking apart and being surrounded by the invading parties. It was at this chaotic time that legend has it Harold was tragically shot in the eye, according to some by friendly fire.
Oh, that sucks.
He was subsequently toppled from his horse and brutally hacked to pieces by several Norman knights.
Ooh.
The death of their king was a horrendous morale blow to the Anglo-Saxons, who began to flee the field, chased down by Norman soldiers.
Wow.
And so it was. The historic Battle of Hastings fell to a decisive victory for the invading Norman forces, and a tragic defeat for the Anglo-Saxons, who lost their king, a man who would ultimately become immortalized not only on the Bayeux Tapestry, but in history itself.
Rip Godwinson. Guy almost won. And, you know, really just a great commander in his own right.
In the following days and weeks, William, Duke of Normandy, and now the Conqueror, marched onwards to London to receive submission and put down all opposition. On Christmas Day 1066, he was crowned the first Norman King of England, bringing the Anglo-Saxon rule to an end. Cultural changes followed in the wake of the battle and the Norman conquest of England. French became the language of the king's court, gradually blending with the Anglo-Saxon tongue to form modern English. William proved an effective...
Yeah, the battle that really helps change the English language as we know it. It's such a cool consequence of this battle.
...ruler, and would go on to become one of England's greatest kings, building dozens of castles and fortifications all over the country.
Also, the Tower of London, I believe, I think he constructed it, could be completely wrong. I apologize if I am, but I've heard it was attributed to him.
Consolidating the kingdom against attackers, and ultimately beginning the Plantagenet monarchical dynasty.
Wow.
Credit goes to our awesome patrons.
Okay, after the Battle of Hastings, over the next 10 weeks, William fought smaller encounters against Saxon militia. After his coronation, he spent 5 to 10 years quelling Saxon revolts and has met a Danish raid into northern England in 1070. Changes in England followed construction of numerous Norman strongholds to resist revolts, changes to laws and organization of local governments into shires, introduction of Anglo-Norman as the language of government, leading to the rise of Middle English. After 1070, William spent most of his time in Normandy, his original power base, resisting attempts by rebels and the King of France to take his duchy from him. France finally succeeded in conquering Normandy in 1204. Wow. That was a really cool series, guys. I enjoyed it, about learning about William the Conqueror, and again, I really loved this. This was so cool to see all the context of what made him the Conqueror, his past, his battles, and again, I really enjoyed this series, so I'll see you guys tomorrow when we start something new, and yeah.